On a cold November morning at the Tri-County Livestock Auction, the veteran auctioneer looked at the widow's small herd and told her she'd be lucky to get $900 a head. Patricia Miller took off her buyer number, handed it back, and said, "Then we're not selling." What happened next is how one woman turned a dismissive prediction into a 300% profit. Patricia Miller was a 58-year-old widow trying to save the ranch her husband had built. With just 23 head of specialty-bred cattle, she was told the open market had no place for her. But what the auctioneer dismissed as a liability, Patricia saw as her only leverage. Because to understand why she walked away from that sale, you have to understand what she stood to lose. The Miller Ranch was 480 acres of high desert grassland in eastern Oregon, a place Frank Miller bought in 1992 with dreams of building a legacy breed. Not just cattle, but a specific kind. Registered Red Angus, known for marbling and grass finishing quality, the kind chefs in Portland and Seattle were starting to request by name. Frank handled the breeding, the pastures, the vet work. Patricia handled the books, the marketing, the relationships. For 28 years, that partnership worked. Then, in March of 2020, Frank had a heart attack checking fences during an early spring snowstorm. He was 61. Patricia buried her husband on a hillside overlooking the home pasture. Then she opened the books and saw the truth. The ranch carried $280,000 in debt, an equipment loan for the tractor and baler, a mortgage on the north 80 acres they'd added in 2010, and the operating line of credit at the local bank, the one that covered feed through winter, fuel, repairs, everything that kept 23 breeding cows and their calves alive until sale day. The payment on all of it was due in 9 months at the end of the grazing season. The bank officer, a man named Dave who'd known Frank since high school, sat across from Patricia in her kitchen 2 weeks after the funeral. His advice was simple and brutal. Sell the herd at the fall auction in Baker City. Take the proceeds, pay down the debt, and sell the land to a developer who was already circling. You're 58, Patricia. You can't run this place alone. No one expects you to. But here's what Dave at the bank didn't understand, what the auctioneer wouldn't understand, what almost no one in the commodity cattle world understood. Patricia Miller hadn't just kept the books. She'd built the network. For 15 years, she'd managed the ranch's direct sales, driving individual halves and quarters of beef to customers in Bend and Boise, taking orders from restaurants that wanted traceable, grass-fed Red Angus beef. She knew the chefs by name. She knew what they paid, premiums of 30, sometimes 40% above commodity prices. But she'd always sold the meat, not the live animals. The entire system was designed to move packaged cuts from their small processing plant to coolers in the city, selling 23 live cows and their calves. That was a different game entirely. A game played almost exclusively by men, in auction yards where price was determined by the pound and the clock, not by pedigree or potential. So Patricia called Donald Meeker, the head auctioneer at Tri-County Livestock. He'd been in the business 35 years. His father had been in it before him. When Patricia explained what she had, 23 registered Red Angus cows, most with calves at their side, all with DNA traceability and vaccination records, Donald was polite but dismissive. "We can run them through, Patricia, but you need to be realistic. The big buyers here are looking for truckloads of 500 uniform black calves to go to feedlots. Your small lot, your specialty breed, it doesn't fit the program. You'll be lucky to see 900 a head, maybe 850. The math was catastrophic. At $900 a head for the mature cows, less for the calves, the entire herd might bring $40,000, maybe 45, not even close to what she needed." But what Donald said next revealed the real trap of the auction system. It's not just the price per head, Patricia. It's the cost of selling. We take a 3% commission on the gross. There's a yardage fee of $25 per head. Brand inspection is $15. Transportation to get them here from your place will run you another $800. And then there's the shrink. Cattle lose 3 to 5% of their body weight in the stress of transport and holding pens. On a 900-pound cow, that's 30 to 45 pounds of valuable beef. gone before the bidding even starts. By the time you pay all the costs, that $900 a head is really more like $780 in your pocket. Patricia hung up the phone and did the math on a yellow legal pad. $780 times 23 cows. $17,940. Not even enough to cover one loan payment, let alone save the ranch. That's when she remembered the list. It was in the bottom drawer of Frank's filing cabinet, tucked behind the breeding charts. A single sheet of paper with 11 names, phone numbers, and notes in Frank's cramped handwriting. The title at the top read, Potential Bull Buyers Premium Genetics. These weren't feedlot managers. They were other small ranchers, like the Jacobs family in Idaho who bred Red Angus for direct sales, and a man named Carl Mendes in California who supplied a high-end ranch-to-table cooperative. These were people who valued bloodlines, not just body weight. Frank had compiled it over years, dreaming of selling breeding bulls for $5,000 each instead of selling calves for $900. He'd never pulled the trigger, always too busy, too cautious. Patricia stared at the list. The auction system was built for volume and speed. This list represented something else, specificity and value. But could she sell 23 head of cattle one phone call at a time? She decided to test the waters. Her first call was to Ben Jacobs in Idaho. Ben remembered Frank well. When Patricia explained her situation, he was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry about Frank, Patricia, truly. But what you're describing, 23 cows, all with calves, all from your breeding program, that's not a liquidation sale. That's a genetic package. If the bloodlines are as clean as Frank said and you have the paperwork to prove it, you shouldn't be talking to an auctioneer. You should be talking to someone like me, or better yet, to the people who buy from me, the direct market chefs. They don't want anonymous beef. They want a story. Your story. A widow continuing her husband's breeding legacy. They'll pay a premium for that narrative alone." Ben offered her a number that made her put a hand on the kitchen counter to steady herself. He believed he could sell her animals as breeding stock or as direct market beef for between $2,000 and $2,500 a head, more than double Donald Meeker's best-case auction prediction. Patricia spent the next week caught between two worlds, the safe, traditional, devastating path of the auction yard, and the risky, uncharted, potentially lucrative path of direct marketing. The pressure mounted daily. The bank sent a polite reminder about the upcoming loan review. The feed bill for the month arrived. And then in early November, she loaded her 23 cows and their calves into the trailer and drove them to the Tri-County livestock auction, as scheduled. She told herself she was just exploring her options. But standing in that concrete viewing area, watching her beautiful, registered animals mixed in with hundreds of generic black calves, she felt something sink in her stomach. This was a system designed to erase distinction, to commoditize everything. Her husband's 30-year breeding program was about to become just another lot number. Donald Meeker found her there, clipboard in hand. He gave her a sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Tough day to sell, Patricia. Market's soft. Those Red Angus sticks out like a sore thumb. I'll do my best for you, but like I said on the phone, manage your expectations." He handed her a buyer number, a small cardboard square with the digits 117 printed on it. That's when Patricia looked past him, at the rows of men in cowboy hats and seed company jackets, none of whom would look her in the eye. She thought of Ben Jacobs' number, $2,000 to $2,500 a head. She thought of the chefs in Portland who'd praised their beef. She thought of Frank's dream, buried on that hillside. And she made a decision that would either save her ranch or bankrupt her completely. She took the buyer number, handed it back to Donald Meeker, and walked out of the auction yard, leaving 23 head of cattle and every conventional rule of agriculture behind. Driving away from the auction yard with a trailer full of unsold cattle, Patricia had just broken the first rule of rural business. She had publicly embarrassed a powerful man. Donald Meeker's reputation was built on moving livestock, on being the final word on what an animal was worth. A widow rejecting his assessment wasn't just a bad sale. It was a challenge to his entire authority. By the time Patricia pulled back onto her ranch, The phone was ringing. It was Dave from the bank. His tone had changed from paternalistic concern to cold professionalism. "Patricia, Donald called me. He said you walked out, left 23 head on his lot without selling. He had to hold a pen for you, disrupt his sale order. He's charging you a $500 no-sale fee. More importantly, what's your plan now? The fall run is over. You've missed the market window." Patricia's plan existed on a single sheet of paper, Frank's list of 11 names. Her first call was to Carl Mendes in California. She described the herd, their bloodlines, their health status. Carl was interested, but he wasn't a charity. "I buy genetics, Patricia, but I buy them after I see ultrasound data on ribeye size and marbling scores. I need to see their pedigree papers. And I don't buy cows with calves at foot as a package. That's a feedlot move. I'd want the cows as potential breeding stock and the calves separately as feeders. Can you split them up? Do you have the facilities to wean those calves?" Patricia looked out the window at her small set of pens, designed for loading, not for long-term separation. "No," she admitted, "I don't." "Then you're not ready to sell to someone like me," Carl said, not unkindly. "You're trying to play a specialty game with a commodity setup." The first reality hit her. Direct marketing wasn't a single decision. It was a complete operational overhaul. It required infrastructure she didn't have, knowledge she hadn't needed, and a timeline that wasn't aligned with the bank's 90-day countdown. That night, she sat at the kitchen table with a stack of bills and Frank's breeding records. The no-sale fee was the least of it. She still had to feed the animals. Winter hay was costing $4,000 a month. The bank payment was looming. The safe, predictable path was gone. She was now in uncharted territory, and the clock was ticking louder every hour. Her breakthrough came from an unexpected source: a newsletter from the Oregon Country Natural Beef Cooperative, a group she and Frank had looked at years prior but never joined. She found an old email for the co-op's manager, a woman named Susan Park. Desperate, Patricia wrote her, explaining her situation. Susan called her 2 days later. "Patricia, I remember you and Frank. I'm so sorry for your loss. What you're describing is exactly why small producers get crushed. The auction system is a volume machine. It grinds up uniqueness. But here's the thing you have that the big lots don't: a story, a verifiable story. Grass-fed, registered red Angus, raised by one family on one ranch with a widow at the helm. For my buyer network, that's not a drawback. It's the main selling feature." Susan explained the co-op model. They aggregated beef from small, trusted ranches, marketed it under a unified brand to high-end grocery chains and restaurants, and returned 85% of the retail price back to the rancher. The catch: Patricia would have to process her cattle at a USDA-inspected plant, package the beef to the co-op specifications, and hold it in frozen storage until delivery, a process that could take months and required upfront cash she didn't have. But the numbers were staggering. Susan estimated that a single, fully processed red Angus steer from Patricia's herd could retail for over $6,000 in cuts. Patricia's share would be around $5,100. For a live animal, Donald Meeker said, was worth $900. It was a potential $10,000 swing per animal. But the gap between potential and reality was a canyon of risk. To even try, Patricia needed to extend her timeline. She needed the bank to wait. She drove into town for a meeting with Dave, armed with Susan's preliminary numbers. Dave listened, steepling his fingers. "Patricia, this is a fantasy. You're talking about spending more money on processing, on storage, on packaging, when you already can't pay your bills. This co-op isn't going to cut you a check today. Donald Meeker would have handed you a check this afternoon. You chose theory over cash. The bank's board meets next week. My recommendation will be to begin foreclosure proceedings on the North 80 acres to recoup some of the operating line. I'm sorry." Patricia left the bank feeling the walls close in. The system was designed to force conformity. Step off the established path, and every institution, the auction, the bank, even the local feed store that now demanded cash on delivery, would push you back onto it or push you out. Her defiance had turned her from a grieving widow into a pariah, a difficult woman who didn't know her place. She heard the whispers at the post office. Too proud to sell. Frank would have never been so stubborn. She's gonna lose it all. But within that isolation, a harder, clearer resolve formed. If the system was stacked against her, she would stop asking it for permission. Susan Park had mentioned another option, selling freezer beef directly to consumers, bypassing the co-op's timeline altogether. It was more work, but the money came faster. Patricia pulled Frank's customer list from their direct sales years. There were about 50 names, people who'd bought a quarter of beef every year. She started calling. The story of her walking out of the auction, of fighting to keep the ranch, became part of the pitch. It wasn't just beef, it was a cause, a stand against the commodity machine. To her stunned relief, she sold 8 whole steers in 3 days, not for a vague future promise from a co-op, but for immediate deposits of $4,000 each, paid directly into her account. $32,000, almost enough to cover the winter feed and buy her a single month of time. But selling 8 animals directly created a new problem. She now had a mixed lot, 8 steers destined for the processor and 15 cows with calves still in the pasture. She couldn't sell the breeding cows as freezer beef. That would destroy Frank's legacy herd. She needed the big genetic sale, the one to a rancher like Ben Jacobs or Carl Mendes. And to do that, she needed the data Carl had asked for, ultrasound metrics. She found a traveling ultrasound technician who charged $300 a head, another $2,400 she didn't have. She paid it with the deposits from her direct beef sales, betting her last cushion on a stack of scientific printouts. When the results came back, they revealed the second, more profound reality. Frank had been a breeding genius. The ribeye areas and marbling scores on his cows were in the top 15% for the Red Angus breed. These weren't just good animals, they were genetic assets. Patricia compiled the data into a simple packet: pedigree charts, ultrasound results, photos, and Frank's breeding philosophy in his own words. She sent it to Ben Jacobs, to Carl Mendes, and to 5 other names she'd researched online. This time, the response was different. Ben called back within hours. "Patricia, this changes everything. You're not selling beef. You're selling proven genetics. I have a client in Montana looking to build a grass-fed program with documented marbling. He'll pay a premium for females with numbers like this. I think we can get $3,000 a head for the top 5 cows." 3,000, not 900. The pivot was now complete. She was no longer a rancher liquidating assets. She was a genetic curator executing a strategic dispersal. But to capture that value, she had to present the herd as a professional asset, not a distressed sale. This meant investing more: professional photography, a veterinarian health certificate for interstate transport, and insurance for the animals while they were being sold. Each step required cash, pulling her deeper into a high-stakes gamble where the prize was monumental, but the cost of failure was total ruin. The tension exploded when Donald Meeker drove out to her ranch. He found her in the barn, organizing the ultrasound files. "Patricia, you're making a fool of yourself and a fool of me," he said, his face flushed. "People are talking. You're peddling fairy tales about $3,000 cows. You're undermining the entire market. Sell those animals through me next week, take the market price, and we can all move on. This pride is going to cost you your home." Patricia didn't look up from her files. "Donald, what's the highest priced lot you've ever sold at Tri-County?" He paused, thrown by the question. "I don't know. A pair of registered quarter-horse yearlings went for $12,500 once. So $12,500, she said calmly. "One of my steers, as packaged beef, will gross over $6,000. One of my top cows, as a breeding asset, might sell for $3. My 23 animals aren't an asterisk lot asterisk to you, Donald. They're 23 individual transactions, each with their own buyer and their own value. You're in the business of selling volume. I'm now in the business of selling value. And they are not the same business." Donald left in a fury. The war was now public. Patricia had drawn a line in the dirt, not just between auction and direct sale, but between 2 conflicting visions of agriculture itself. One valued efficiency and scale. The other valued story and specificity. The community chose sides. A few neighbors, older women who'd watched their own inheritances shrink, offered quiet encouragement. The rest, including most of the local agribusiness network, closed ranks with Donald and the bank. Her credit at the feed store was officially revoked. With 90 days left before the bank's final decision, Patricia had sold 8 steers for $32,000 and had verbal offers on 5 cows for $15,000. It was $47,000 total, a lifeline but not nearly enough to clear the debt. She had 10 cows and their calves left. To save the ranch, she needed to sell them not just well but perfectly. She needed to prove that her model wasn't a fluke but a replicable, superior system. And she needed to do it in the full, hostile glare of everyone who said it couldn't be done. The pressure was no longer just financial. It was existential. Every day that passed was a referendum on whether a woman alone could rewrite the rules of a century-old game. The bank's letter arrived on a Tuesday, formal notice of intent to foreclose on the North 80 acres in 45 days. It wasn't a recommendation anymore, it was legal procedure. The document listed the outstanding balance on the operating line, $112,000. Selling the land would cover it and close her file for good. Patricia held the paper, the official bank watermark feeling like a brand. Dave hadn't even called. The system had moved from persuasion to force. This forced her hand. The $15,000 in verbal offers for 5 cows weren't enough. She needed the remaining 10 cows and their calves to perform a financial miracle. She doubled down on marketing, but now with a sophisticated edge she hadn't possessed before. Using Frank's old computer, she built a simple website. Not just a sales page, but a story page. Photos of Frank with his first red Angus bull. Photos of the ranch through the seasons. A copy of the ultrasound results. And a blog post titled, "Why I Walked Out of the Auction." She emailed the link to every chef, every food co-op, every sustainable agriculture group she could find. The response was a tidal wave, but not the one she expected. It didn't come from individual buyers first. It came from a journalist at a Pacific Northwest food magazine who'd been forwarded the link. He called, intrigued by the economics. He published a short online piece, "Widowed Rancher Rejects Auction, Bets on Story Over Scale." The article included Donald Meeker's original quote about being lucky to get 900 ahead and Patricia's calm rebuttal about value versus volume. It went live on a Friday morning. By Monday, Patricia's inbox was flooded, not just with purchase inquiries, but with messages from other farmers, mostly women, writing, "You are living my fight." The publicity was a double-edged sword. It legitimized her in the eyes of distant, specialty buyers, but it inflamed the local opposition beyond anything she'd anticipated. Donald Meeker was livid. The article made him look like a dinosaur, a symbol of a dying system. He called an emergency meeting of the local Cattlemen's Association, a group Frank had belonged to for decades. A formal vote was taken to suspend Patricia's membership for conduct unbecoming and actions detrimental to the market stability of the county. The notice arrived in her mailbox, signed by Donald as the association president. The symbolic meaning was clear. She was no longer part of the community. She was an outsider. Then the second crisis hit. The processor, the USDA plant where she'd booked time for her 8 steers, called. There was a problem. A state inspector had flagged their facility for a minor compliance issue. The plant was shutting down for 2 weeks for repairs. Patricia's processing date, the linchpin of her direct beef sales and the source of the $32,000 in deposits, was canceled. She had customers who'd paid for beef that now didn't exist on the promised timeline. She had 8 steers eating expensive feed with nowhere to go. And she had a contract with the processor that had a force majeure clause protecting them from liability. She was stuck. Panic, cold and sharp, set in for the first time. She had played her hand perfectly, built a new market, told her story, and now the brittle, interconnected infrastructure of small-scale agriculture had snapped. One broken link, the processor, threatened to collapse her entire enterprise. She called her customers, explaining the delay. Some were understanding. two demanded immediate refunds. She had to return $8,000 she'd already spent on hay and ultrasound tech. Her bank account, which had briefly flickered with hope, plunged back into the red. This was the wait it gets worse moment. The direct market wasn't just a sales channel. It was a fragile house of cards where she bore every single risk the auction yard traditionally absorbed. Transportation risk, processing risk, market risk, customer risk. She was the auctioneer, the transporter, the salesperson, and the guarantor, and she was failing. Sitting at her kitchen table, staring at the foreclosure notice and the refund requests, Patricia faced the real possibility that Dave and Donald had been right, that her pride and her belief in a better way had been a catastrophic vanity. What saved her, ironically, was the very community that had ostracized her. A woman named Marie, who ran a small goat dairy 2 counties over and had quietly emailed Patricia after reading the article, called her. Marie had been through a processor shutdown the year before. "Patricia, listen to me. You have 2 problems: live animals you need to turn into money and customers waiting for product. Your animals are grass-fed, right? They're not on a feedlot clock, so delay is okay. Tell your customers the truth. The beef will be better for the extra weeks on pasture. Offer them a 5% discount for the wait. Most will stay. For the processing, you need a Hail Mary. Call the Oregon Country Natural Beef Co-op. They have a rotating slot at a plant in Washington for emergencies. Beg Susan Park for it." Patricia, desperate, followed the advice. She emailed her customers with brutal honesty about the shutdown, the delay, and a sincere discount. Only one more asked for a refund. The rest stayed. Then she called Susan Park at the co-op, voice shaking. Susan listened. "Okay, Patricia, this is the fire drill every small producer fears. I have a slot in 2 weeks at the plant in Yakima. It's a 1,200-mile round trip for you, and it's expensive. But I'll give it to you under 2 conditions. First, you formally apply to the co-op. Your herd is exactly what we need. Second, you let me use your story, the auction walkout, the processor crisis, all of it, in our marketing. Your resilience is our best advertisement." Patricia agreed without hesitation. The scramble was epic. She arranged livestock transportation to Washington, a cost of another $2,000. She had to get new health certificates for interstate travel. She spent nights packing freezer packaging ordered online with the last of her credit card limit. But the 8 steers were processed. The beef was packaged, stored, and began shipping to her customers. The money, the real money, finally started flowing. Not as fast as an auction check, but steadier and in much, much larger amounts. This hard-won victory, however, revealed the final, most daunting hurdle. She had solved the beef side. But the breeding stock side, the 10 remaining cows and calves worth triple the auction price, required a different kind of buyer. A buyer who wasn't just purchasing meat but investing thousands in genetics. And those buyers required something the auction never did: trust. Not trust in the system, but trust in her, Patricia Miller, as a credible steward of genetic legacy. Her story was now an asset, but her gender and her outsider status were still a liability in the conservative world of purebred cattle breeding. The breakthrough came from Ben Jacobs in Idaho. He'd been quietly shopping her packet to his network. He called with an offer, but not for the cows, for something else. "Patricia, I showed your data to my client in Montana. He doesn't want to buy your cows. He wants to buy their *future*. He wants the breeding rights. He'll pay you $1,500 per cow for a 5-year breeding lease. He gets the right to use their genetics in his herd via artificial insemination. You keep the physical cows, you keep raising their calves, but he gets their bloodline. It's a royalty model. For 10 cows, that's $15,000 a year, guaranteed for 5 years. It was an innovative, almost unheard-of deal for a ranch of her size. It valued information over mass, genetics over weight. It was the ultimate validation of Frank's life work and her defiant strategy. But accepting it meant transforming the ranch from a commodity producer into an intellectual property firm. It meant her future revenue wouldn't come from selling calves by the pound, but from licensing the genetic code inside them. She had 48 hours to decide. The Montana buyer was talking to other breeders. The bank's 45-day clock was ticking down, and Donald Meeker, hearing whispers of the deal, made one final power play. He used his influence at the county level to challenge the legal description of her livestock business, arguing her new genetic leasing model violated zoning laws for agricultural land. It was a bureaucratic grenade, designed not to win, but to stall her long enough for the foreclosure to proceed. Patricia Miller now stood at the convergence of every battle she had sparked: the financial battle with the bank, the cultural battle with the auction house, the logistical battle of a new supply chain, and now a legal battle over the very definition of her ranch. The pressure had escalated from saving her home to defending an entirely new agricultural paradigm. The showdown was no longer just about price per head. It was about who gets to define value and who gets to write the rules for the future. And it would all be decided in the cramped hearing room of the county planning office, with a fate more final than any auctioneer's gavel waiting just days away. The county zoning hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Thursday, the same day the bank's 45-day foreclosure notice expired. Patricia arrived alone, carrying a single binder. Donald Meeker was there with the Cattlemen's Association's lawyer. The hearing officer, a weary-looking county employee named Gary, had the zoning code open on his laptop. The charge was that Patricia's genetic leasing constituted a non-agricultural commercial activity, violating the land's exclusive farm use designation. Donald's argument was simple: farming is about producing physical goods, calves, beef, hay. Selling the right to use a cow's genetics was, in his words, an abstract financial transaction, no different than selling stock options. It's not farming. Patricia had prepared. She stood and opened her binder. "Mr. Chairman, my operation produces two physical goods, beef and breeding stock. The genetic lease is an ancillary agreement that guarantees my income so I can continue producing those goods. It's a risk management tool like crop insurance. If I leased my pasture to another rancher, that would be allowed. If I leased my tractor, that would be allowed. I am leasing the reproductive capacity of my livestock, a core agricultural asset, to ensure the stability of my farm." She presented printed pages from the Oregon Department of Agriculture's website, highlighting definitions of agricultural enterprise and value-added agricultural product. She had also called in a favor from Susan Park at the co-op, who had connected her with a state extension agent. The agent had provided a written statement that genetic leasing was an emerging, recognized practice in sustainable livestock breeding. Gary, the hearing officer, listened, asked a few technical questions, and then turned to Donald's lawyer. "Is there any evidence that the lessee, the Montana rancher, will not be using these genetics for agricultural breeding purposes?" The lawyer fumbled. "No, but the point is the activity on this asterisk parcel. The point," Gary interrupted, "is the end use. If the genetics are used for agriculture, then the transaction supports agriculture. Case dismissed." The gavel tapped. The whole proceeding lasted 22 minutes. Donald left the room without looking at her. The legal grenade had been a dud. Now she had 1 hour to get to the bank. She drove directly there, the signed breeding lease agreement in her binder. She met with Dave and a bank manager from the regional office who'd been brought in to review the file. Patricia laid out her new financial reality. She had $32,000 from the processed beef sales, with more customer orders pending. She had a signed contract for a $15,000 annual breeding lease for 5 years, with the first payment due upon signing. She had verbal commitments for the sale of 5 weaned calves from the leased cows at a premium of $1,200 each. Her total projected revenue for the next 12 months was over $80,000 from the herd alone, not counting the existing land. She was converting fixed assets into predictable cash flow. The regional manager, a woman in her 40s named Lisa, did the math. She saw the contracts, the canceled checks from beef customers, the zoning hearing victory. She saw a business model transitioning from high-risk commodity production to diversified, value-added enterprises. She overruled Dave's recommendation. The bank restructured Patricia's debt, combining the operating line and mortgage into a single loan with a lower interest rate and a 5-year term. The foreclosure was stopped. The ranch was safe. The news spread through the county faster than the original article had. Patricia Miller hadn't just survived, she had won on her own terms. The financial victory was absolute. Let's do the final math. Donald Meeker's original prediction, $900 a head, totaling roughly $40,000 for the herd, with fees and shrink netting her about $35,000. Patricia's actual outcome, the 8 steers brought in $32,000 in direct beef sales. The 5 cows sold as breeding stock brought $15,000. The 10-cow breeding lease brought $75,000 over 5 years, with the first $15,000 payment up front. The 5 weaned calves from those leased cows brought $6,000. In the first year alone, from the same 23 animals, she generated $68,000 in immediate revenue and secured $60,000 in future lease payments. Nearly $130,000 in total value versus Donald's $35,000, a profit margin of over 270%. But the real payoff wasn't in the ledger. It was in the quiet shifts that followed. Donald Meeker never called to apologize, but 6 months later, Tri-County Livestock Auction added a new category to its sale listings: specialty genetics and direct market lots. They didn't sell many, but the acknowledgement was there. Dave, the bank officer, took early retirement. The local feed store, under new management, reinstated her credit and asked if she'd consider selling a line of ranch-branded beef through their front office. The most profound change was in the community of women. Patricia started getting weekly calls, not just from Oregon, but from Wyoming, Texas, Kansas. Women who'd inherited farms who were being pushed toward liquidation. She began consulting for free, walking them through the steps of direct marketing, of building a story, of reading their loan documents with a red pen. She never formed an official business. She just answered the phone and said, "The first thing you do is take your buyer number and hand it back." Now here is the surprising detail, the one that brings the story full circle. 2 years after the hearing, Patricia was clearing out Frank's filing cabinet. In the very back of the bottom drawer, behind decades of breeding records, she found a sealed envelope. It was addressed to her in Frank's handwriting. It was dated 1 month before he died. She opened it. Inside was a single page, a printout of an email Frank had drafted but never sent. It was to Ben Jacobs in Idaho. The subject line read, "Future of Miller Red Angus." The email said, "Ben, I've been thinking, the auction system will never value what we've built. If something ever happens to me, tell Patricia to sell the herd herself. She knows the customers. She knows the story. Don't let her take them to auction. She can do this. I've watched her for 28 years. She just doesn't know it yet." He'd never hit send. He never told her. He just left the note, like a seed in the dark, trusting she'd find her way to the light. Patricia Miller still runs the ranch. The breeding lease income paid off the restructured loan in 3 years. She now keeps a small herd of 20 red Angus cows, selling beef directly to a waiting list of customers and leasing genetics to 5 different ranches across 3 states. The Montana rancher who bought the first lease has won awards for the steak produced from the offspring of her cows. Donald Meeker still runs the auction. They nod to each other civilly at the county fair. The war is over. A new equilibrium, hard-won and fragile, has taken its place. So let me ask you the question Patricia asked herself in that auction yard, the one that changes everything. When someone with power tells you what your life's work is worth, do you accept their number? Or do you hand back the buyer number, walk out into the cold and build a new market, one customer, one story, one contract at a time? Because the difference between $900 and $3,000 isn't just a price. It's the distance between the world as it is and the world as it could be, if you have the courage to read the fine print, not in the contract, but in your own potential. Patricia Miller read hers, and that, more than any check, was the payoff. Patricia Miller's story is about more than cattle. It's about every system built on volume, speed, and conformity, systems that will always undervalue the unique, the small batch, the story-rich. The auction yard isn't just a place. It's a metaphor. It's the college admissions office telling a kid with an unusual talent they're not a good fit. It's the corporate job that promotes the predictable over the inventive. It's any gatekeeper who confuses market price with true value. For centuries, agriculture, like many industries, operated on a simple principle: centralize, commoditize, control. The story of the family farm, the artisan, the craftsman, was an anecdote, a charming, inefficient footnote to the main text of progress. What Patricia proved, and what the rising tide of direct market farms, craft breweries, and independent creators are proving every day, is that the footnote is becoming the text. The story is the product. And in a world saturated with anonymous goods, authenticity is the scarcest, most valuable commodity of all. This shift is especially profound for women who, despite making up 36% of agricultural producers, have historically been sidelined in the transaction-heavy, negotiation-driven spaces of commodity sales. Patricia's victory wasn't just financial. It was a reclamation of authority in a sphere where her expertise had been automatically discounted. Her success is a blueprint, not because it's easy to replicate, but because it proves the barrier isn't knowledge or skill. It's the courage to endure the laughter in the feed store, the cold silence at the bank, and the lonely drive home after walking away from the crowd. So the lingering question isn't whether you have a herd of cattle to sell. It's this: what in your life have you let the auction yard define? What talent, project, or idea have you allowed to be valued by a system designed to process bulk, not cultivate brilliance? Where have you accepted the buyer number handed to you when you should have been building your own buyer list? The contract for your potential doesn't have an acceleration clause for any reason, but it does have a default clause for inaction. The world's Donalds will always be there, clipboard in hand, ready to give you the going rate for a dream they don't understand. Your job is not to convince them. Your job is to find the people who have been looking for what only you can provide, and to build the road between you, no matter how long it takes. Patricia Miller still puts her hand on the old tractor hood sometimes, feeling the sun-warmed metal, standing on land that is still hers, because she handed back the number. And that single, defiant act set in motion not just the saving of a ranch, but the reclaiming of a destiny. If you want more stories of quiet rebellion that reshape loud systems, consider subscribing. We're here to document the moments when someone decides the price on the tag is not the value in their heart. Thanks for watching.